First thing I want to get out of the way is that this is my first video, so bear with me if it's as bad as the movie I'm reviewing, if not infinitely worse. Thank you. Recently, we got the latest addition to the MCU, Captain America: Brave New World. And it's a movie. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the worst Marvel movie. It's got some pretty stiff competition there. The way I see it, there's two kinds of bad movies. There's aggressively bad and there's passively bad. Aggressive is a movie that's just plain annoying to watch, maybe even infuriating. The kind of movie you walk out of because you'd rather do anything else than subject yourself to another minute of it. Passive is mainly just boring. It's the kind of movie where you end up zoning out and might even take a nap. I'd say this is more of a nap movie than a walkout. What do I mean? Well, let's just get to it. Spoilers ahead. We start with Thunderbolt Ross, who is now President Ross. Then we move on to Sam, who's on a mission to retrieve some stolen adamantium from the Serpent Society. Don't bother remembering that name, they're barely even worth mentioning. After an embarrassing fight scene, Sam and Falcon Jr. train with Isaiah Bradley, then go to the White House. An assassination attempt later puts Isaiah in jail along with some others. Sam thinks there's something suspicious about this whole thing and investigates, where he finds out that Isaiah and the others were Manchurian Candidate-id. And after another fight scene, they track it down to a military building. I know I sped through a big chunk of the movie just then, but there really wasn't much worth mentioning at all. Anyway, they get to the building, and here we learn that it was the leader behind everything who looks like this for some reason. Look, I get that it's a comic book movie and things are bound to look a little bit silly, but this isn't even silly because it's comic accurate. This is a completely new creation. What's even more baffling is that older concept art shows it originally did look more comic accurate, but they changed it. The reason seems to be because the movie was trying to be more grounded and realistic, and something like this was just too ridiculous to fit the tone right. Few things about that. One, calling this movie grounded and realistic is a bit of a stretch. Two, if your goal was to be grounded, then maybe don't make a character like this your villain. Three, if your goal was to make it look less ridiculous, it failed. Not only is this not any less ridiculous, I would argue it looks far, far worse. Now look, I can see what they were trying to go for, making it look like the gamma radiation had mangled his head into some grotesque, horrifying thing. A good-ish example of doing this was the Abomination in The Incredible Hulk. I say ish because, again, it's not comic accurate, and I think it's a bit too desaturated, but something like the jagged bones just sticking out truly make this look like an abomination. This just looks like he's got some cauliflower on his head. Now maybe if they did a mix of the two things, keeping the big head and the facial hair in tandem with a weird bulbous head, it could have worked way better. If only there was an example of this very thing happening in practice. Skipping ahead, we get to what many who like this film tend to say is the best scene. Not that that's particularly a great achievement, seeing as it's this movie. The setup is kind of interesting. Two American jets have been Manchurian Candidated and fire on some Japanese ships. Then Japan sends some jets of their own, and we get a sort of dogfight around the Celestial Island. Basically, the American jets and Japanese jets fighting with the two Falcons caught in the middle just trying to make sure no one else gets hurt. In theory, this should make for a great action scene. In practice, something about it just doesn't work. I can't say what it is specifically. Maybe the writing, maybe the choreography of the fight itself, whatever the case. The fact is, it's just kinda eh. Well, it ends with Falcon Jr. trying to take down a missile way too close. Sam warns him not to, and Jr. does it anyway, saying he's got this. Well, he apparently didn't, because he gets hurt and we cut to him in the hospital. Sam stands outside and Bucky shows up and gives him a pep talk. One thing that's nice about this scene is it shows Sam is having a hard time living up to Steve's memory. Don't really stick around long enough for it to have much of an impact before we just move on to the next thing. Which is kind of a big problem with this movie in general, is the pacing. See, fast pacing is generally good for action because you can really feel the electric energy of it. Slow is better for more dramatic as you can really let the emotions stew. A mix of the two is usually what movies like this go for, and this movie goes for a mix that has none of the benefits of either. The movie feels really long, so the fun and energy of fast pace is gone, and it also moves from plot point to plot point so quickly, you the emotions don't really have a chance to really have much of an impact. Somehow this movie has found a way to be too slow and too fast at the same time. We go to a scene where Ross is holding a press conference while Sam finds the leader and just hanging out and is promptly arrested. It seems the point of this was to be kind of like that scene in Seven where John Doe turns himself in, to relate it back to superhero movies where the Joker gets captured in The Dark Knight, or even the Riddler in The Batman. What these scenes share is it put a point when the villain was in custody of the good guys, and yet you could still feel like he had complete control of the situation, which they did. They make for great, or at least good, scenes in all of them, but this movie kind of completely moves past that. It's here I want to talk about the leader's plan and motivation. Mainly that they're cliche and boring. See, Leader helped Ross rise up political ranks with the promise that he would be pardoned after. Then, when he didn't, the Leader plotted revenge by making Ross look bad and start a war, I guess, and unleashing the Red Hulk. It's a very stock action thriller plot. In fact, this whole movie, writing-wise, feels like a bad TV movie from the 90s. That's probably still giving it far too much credit. Compared to other plans like, say, Zemo and Civil War, who meticulously pulled strings to split the Avengers apart and turn a great friendship into a rivalry, it's just laughable in comparison. Made even worse by the fact that this is the leader. A guy who's not just smart by regular standards, he's superhumanly smart. This should be one of, if not the most in-depth, complex villain plan of any Marvel to date with a character like that. If he wants to ruin Ross's reputation, this should be like Die Hard 4 level, dismantling the country from the inside out, not just starting a war, but ruining markets, the infrastructure, everything, and pin it all on Ross. Make it in a way that only this character could. Instead, it's Actually, it doesn't do too much that's smart. There's the cliche plot, it invents the mind control, which is pretty interesting, and calculates probabilities a couple times. It's kind of it. They really don't make a good use of this being the leader. Well, anyway, we get to the scene everyone's already seen in the trailer. After the leader reveals how Ross screwed him and blasts a phone call from earlier in the movie over loudspeakers, Ross transforms into the Red Hulk. Speaking of the trailers, man, what false advertising. Red Hulk is in this movie for all of about 5 minutes or so, and yet the trailers, the posters portray this as a Sam versus Red Hulk movie. Not to sound like Captain Hindsight from South Park, but what they maybe should have done instead is have the leader as the marketed villain in the trailers and posters, and leave Red Hulk to be the grand surprise only found out when the movie actually releases. That being said, this is a pretty cool scene. You see this transformation slowly happen, and there's a great music sting, and they almost immediately mess it up. The Secret Service, with a giant Hulk in front of them, decide to shoot at him with handguns. Yeah, maybe that could make sense if they were like running away and blindly shooting behind them, knowing it wasn't going to work, but it was the only defense they had. No, they just stand like 15, 20 feet away and shoot like it's going to do something, which it doesn't. Then some guys with rifles shoot at him, which doesn't do anything either. It's here that Sam comes into the fight and they end up at the top of the White House. After a bit, the government sends in their best chance, a helicopter with a machine gun, which doesn't work. Then they send another helicopter with a machine gun. Also doesn't work. Seriously, we're this far into the MCU and the government doesn't have any contingencies against the Hulk or even adjacent threat? They had better countermeasures in the Hulk movie from 2008. And that they had these sonic cannons, which granted also didn't work, but still. Probably have a more advanced version of these, or at least a version, but no. Sam leads him off to fight to the ground, and we learn that even though Sam doesn't have the super soldier serum, he is apparently very resistant to concussions. Sam continues to fight to basically no avail and nearly loses until Sam releases all the stored energy in his vibranium wing back at him, which causes a huge explosion, which we soon learn did precisely nothing as the Red Hulk gets right back to smashing stuff. What I thought this would lead to is a more in-depth scene of the Red Hulk causing destruction. With the explosion, Sam is injured and can't stop or interfere. You know, Red Hulk just starts going on a rampage, and it's here that we see Betty show up physically for the first time. The very sight sends Red Hulk and the audience back to a flashback to when Ross and Betty were younger and they would walk down this very road, and That's what calms him down and undoes the transformation. Sam gets up and gives a speech, which ends up being the thing that calms Ross down, and it's here the movie ends. Isaiah is released from prison, and we get a nice enough scene where Betty actually shows up to visit Ross, who's now on the raft. Then we get a credit scene where basically the leader just goes, "Hey, you know that whole Secret Wars thing? Yeah, it's still coming. Okay, thanks for checking in." And that is Captain America Brave New World. For the positives, I liked Sam. But here's the thing, I liked him better in everything else. He's better in Winter Soldier, Civil War, hell, I even liked him better in Ant-Man. Same pretty much goes for all returning characters. I liked Ross better in Incredible Hulk and Civil War, even though he was a different actor. And even though he wasn't the leader yet and had a much smaller role comparatively, I liked him much better in the Hulk too. Really, the only exception is Isaiah Bradley, because at least this time he has a character other than just spouting identity politics. Falcon Jr., I guess, is supposed to be a sort of comedic sidekick. He isn't annoying, which is more than you can say for other comedic sidekicks, but there's not much else to say. He was just likable enough not to be annoying. Actually, I should have put this in the returning character category since he was in Falcon and Winter Soldier. Completely forgot about that. There's Ruth Bat Seraph, who is Sabra in the comics, a mutant who is basically the Israeli Captain America. She is not that in the film, I'm guessing to avoid controversy, although they got it anyway. In this movie, she's basically a knockoff Black Widow. She does some spy stuff, looks at some files, and does some gymnastic fighting. Let's see, who else was there? There's the military guy that Sam was friends with, the Japanese Prime Minister, the advisor, who I guess was friends with Sam for some reason. Someone else, wasn't there? Oh yeah, Giancarlo Esposito was in this. At first, he's kind of interesting, but he's like in 3 scenes. He's really not in it long enough to have much of an impact. If you like this movie, all the more power to you. This video is just to vent about my frustration with not only this movie, but post-Endgame MCU as a whole. These movies are made by the largest entertainment company in the world, with some of the biggest name actors in the business, with great characters and great stories just waiting to be adapted. Oh, maybe not Captain Falcon, but regardless. They have every resource they could need to make projects like this the best movies and shows of all time, and yet, with very few exceptions, they're mid at best.